Has there ever been a time when you knew something was wrong, but stayed quiet because speaking up felt a little too uncomfortable? Maybe it was a comment that crossed the line, or a decision at work that just didn't sit right with you, or even watching someone get treated unfairly while everyone else pretended not to notice. The truth is that most people tend to know the difference between right and wrong, but the real struggle isn't always morality, it's actually having the courage to do something about it. So, today we're going to talk about how humans actually know right from wrong, why good people tend to stay silent, what research says about standing up for what's right, and some practical, realistic ways that you can do something without becoming a martyr or even burning bridges. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of the Main Lore podcast. I am your host, Laura, and today's episode is about standing up for what's right when it's easier to stay silent. Psychologists and neuroscientists have studied morality for decades, and the fascinating part about it, I'm so passionate about this topic, is that research from developmental psychology shows that even infants react negatively to unfairness. Babies as young as 6 months old prefer helpful behavior over harmful behavior. Now, what does that mean? It means that our sense of right and wrong is wired into us. And neuroscience tends to back this up because when people witness injustice, these areas in the brain are linked to emotional processing, like the amygdala or even the anterior cingulate cortex. Those tend to light up whenever people witness injustice. So your discomfort is not a sense of weakness. It's actually information that's being processed in your brain. So if humans are biologically wired to recognize wrongdoing, then why do so many people ignore it? Let's talk about the psychology of silence. You've probably heard of the bystander effect, where studies show that the more people are present in a room, or at least that are witnesses to a wrongdoing and injustice, the less likely that any one of them is going to act to prevent it. And it's usually because everyone assumes that someone else is going to handle it. You know, if there are so many people in the room, I'm sure someone's going to see it and do something about it. Or perhaps you think, well, maybe I'm overreacting. So if no one's doing anything about it, then it's probably just me. Or maybe I'm just being too dramatic. But the truth is that maybe you're right. And the thing is that silence tends to become contagious. And I'll give you an example of something that happened, and I'm afraid to even admit that this happened to me recently, where I was at the mall shopping for Christmas gifts, and I got hungry, got something to eat at the food court, and about 3 or 4 tables away from me, there were these group of girls, teenage girls, that were, just hanging out. And I noticed them because it just reminded me of my time when I was their age, long story. But anyway, one of the girls got up. She went to order a pizza at the counter. And then one of the other girls decided to follow her there. And they started talking very intensely towards each other. And I'm looking at them wondering, well, that's kind of weird. But, again, I'm thinking, well, they're teenagers. Maybe that's just how they talk to each other. When they go back to the table with the rest of their friends, all of a sudden they start fighting. And when I tell you, one girl started punching the other in the face and scratching her and pulling her hair, and the other one started defending herself. And I was in such shock that first of all, I was trying to figure out what was happening, if they were maybe play fighting, because one thing that I did was look at their other friends to see if they were actually fighting for real, because their other friends weren't doing anything about it. They were just laughing. And so I was confused, first of all, and I was trying to understand whether it was something that I should be concerned about. But again, because I looked at their friends and the friends weren't concerned, I figured that maybe this was normal for them. And of course, in hindsight, I was kicking myself because then I realized that the other girl, her face was red. She has scratches all over her face. And so I felt horrible that I didn't stand up for her. Little do you know, everyone else in that food court felt the same because it happened very quickly, first of all. But at the same time, it just felt like maybe we could have done something had we known that this was happening for real, because I didn't feel real. And so it made me realize that I had just been a byproduct of the bystander effect, where you see something, you see it happening, and it happens so quickly, or maybe it's happening and nobody else is doing something. So maybe it's just me overreacting. Maybe it's normal for them. And after processing everything, I wish, that she would have gone to the bathroom or something so that I could have told her, like, you just stay away from these friends because they're not your friends. This could happen at any moment to any one of you. So just be mindful of that, because silence really does become contagious, because you always think that there's someone else in the room that's going to step up and do something. But what happens if no one does? Now, oftentimes people tend to not do anything because they fear social consequences. There's plenty of research in social psychology that shows that humans fear social rejection more so than physical pain. So you're afraid to be outlawed. You're afraid to be blackballed. You're afraid to be discarded, right? Because you stood up for something that you know is right. And a lot of times it could be very risky. It could look like being disliked, being labeled as difficult, losing your status, relationships, opportunities. We see this in the public eye all the time, where people are willing to minimize themselves in order to maintain their social status or their powerful status, because in the end, what they lose is more important to them than what they tend to gain if they spoke up about something. And so people tend to choose that comfort over their conscience, which is kind of scary if you think about it. Now, there's a psychologist called Albert Bandura that found that people tend to mentally justify inaction by minimizing that harm that occurs. And so they start saying things like, well, maybe it's not that bad, or, well, that's just how things are. That's the way people do things around here. It's not my responsibility, or it doesn't affect me. And we see this happen all the time, even within our own families, where we see could be abuse, people who are violent. There are things that we tend to overlook. And it's usually because we're either financially dependent on the person, or maybe that person has a hold on us somehow. And so we tend to ignore it. And it could look like telling your child, like, hey, maybe be a little quieter next time because you don't want to upset your dad, who is a drunk, and now they're slamming things everywhere. When the truth is that the person who is doing the violence should be the one being held accountable. But instead, we project that inaction by trying to minimize it and instead placing the blame somewhere else. To be fair, it's not always something that's done in an evil sense. It tends to be more out of self-preservation, because they also tend to be manipulated and also controlled with tangible things or money or power or whatever it is in order for them to stay quiet. So you start to minimize the problem and you start to rationalize with the problem not being such a big deal as long as your bills are getting paid, you still have a job. But the cost sometimes tends to be bigger than we realize. Research shows that staying silent when your values are violated could often lead to an increase in stress. It could lower your sense of self-respect. You'll have this internal conflict that will probably not let you sleep at night because you're so conflicted within yourself, knowing that this is wrong, that you don't know what to do with yourself. And then there's also that sense of regret that comes later on in life or later down the road, which will come back to you and say, wow, I cannot believe that I did nothing about it. Just like I'm telling you now about the problem I faced at the mall and seeing what I saw with the girls fighting. And now me thinking, wow, I should have done something. What could I have done? And obviously I feel like I could have done a lot more. There's also this one study that was done where participants who failed to act against injustice, talking now about that sense of regret, reported that they felt more guilt and shame later on than those who actually did act and say something in the moment, despite the fact that they did face consequences. Think about that anytime that you witness some injustice, something that is going wrong. In the end, that sense of regret is going to be so much bigger than if you actually would have stepped up, said something, and stood up for something. In other words, the silence does not protect your peace. It tends to erode it over time. When you think about it, having integrity isn't always going to be loud, and it doesn't need to be. It's more about being able to live with yourself when no one is watching. So here are some ways where you could stand up for what's right. And it doesn't always mean being confrontational or having this huge public outcry, calling out people or screaming, right? It doesn't need to be that way. Research on ethical courage shows that small, consistent actions are actually more effective than dramatic moments. Now, I'm going to give you some practical, realistic ways in which you can do this so that you know that you have options. And the first one is naming the discomfort. If something feels off, just say it out loud. Say, this doesn't feel right with me. Or, I don't know, this looks wrong, right? So even just having that little bit of doubt and voicing that out to others will help people thinking, why does she think that? Or where is that coming from? Because sometimes you may not notice it. And if somebody's calling it out, then you probably look at it from another perspective. You can also try asking clarifying questions. And this is something that I love to do myself. It is one of those things that is super powerful, but is actually very low risk. Playing dumb will save you from a lot of things, to be honest. So one thing that you can do is say, can you explain why this decision was made? Can you clarify why we went about it this way? Or how does this align with your values? Why do you feel that this is the right thing to do? And so it's taking away the blame of focusing on that person, but instead you're focusing on the behavior or the action itself. Because you may feel like that person is powerful or popular or whatever it is, but the minute that you start calling out the behavior itself and saying, how does this help everyone? What is the end goal? Like finding things that will make people wonder, what's the point of this? Like, why do you feel like this would help someone? Why would you choose to treat someone that way? And it's super powerful because now they have to rationalize with the behavior and now they have to explain it. And oftentimes that's nearly impossible to do. And if they try to do that, then, come on, you're calling out their BS. It's such a powerful tool to use when all you want to do is call it out. And the reason is that the question tends to force reflection without necessarily having this immediate conflict. You're not being mean. You're not being angry. You're just asking for clarity. And who doesn't like clarity, right? Now, being present could also mean supporting the person, not only the moment. So if you notice that someone is being mistreated, make sure to check in with them privately. Ask them how they're doing, how they're feeling. Let them know that you acknowledge what has happened to them and then validate their experience. Let them know that you see them, because a lot of times when people are going or are victims of any wrongdoing or any injustice, oftentimes most people will look the other way. They don't want to get involved. But if you are someone who is courageous, who is willing to show up for them, and then, of course, if you're able, offer help, become an ally, let them know that you are there to help them any way you can. Letting that person know that they're not alone will help them tremendously. Probably more than you know, because I went through that experience a few years back where I thought I was going crazy because I was experiencing harassment and I wasn't really sure what to do. I was losing my mind, not sure who to reach out to, but I was immediately put at ease when I noticed, or at least I realized, that people were showing up for me and they were asking me questions like, hey, I noticed that this is happening to you. Are you okay? What can I do to help? And that helped me so much, because imagine showing up to, let's say, work every day, knowing that at least no matter what happens, there are people there who are watching and who are listening. And that kind of takes away a little bit of the pressure off of you to know that there are always going to be people there to be your ally and to support you any way they can. So the people that were there for me that time, I will forever be grateful for them. They are dear to my heart because definitely helped me get through those times. Now, of course, you don't have to fight every battle. There's ethical research that suggests sustainable integrity tends to come from knowing your non-negotiables. So, for example, how much can you tolerate? Is the person that you're dating rude to the waiters, the people of service? If you know that this is their character, if this is how they treat people all the time, are you willing to tolerate it enough to look away? Or is it something that you're going to say, hey, this is where I draw the line. I am out of here. So find your non-negotiables and just act consistently in those areas. And your self-respect, as a result, will remain intact. Your internal conflict will be non-existent because in the end, you're doing what is right. Of course, it's always important to understand and realize that your moral muscle isn't always going to be strong, right? It's not going to be strong in the beginning. It takes practice. Each small act of integrity will increase your sense of confidence. It will reduce that sense of fear that you're going to feel by stepping up and voicing out your concern. It would also make it easier in the future when something else happens. It will get easier time and time again. So, of course, unfortunately, things aren't just one-offs, right? Like we're always going to be witnessing injustices, wrongdoings, things that just don't feel good. And it is our duty. I think it is our duty as human beings to show up for other people. We want people to show up for ourselves, right? Like if we're going through something, we want people to be there to show up for us and let us know that we're not alone. So it's always important to at least pay that forward and let other people know as well that we're going to be there, that no matter what happens, there's always going to be someone there who's going to call out the nonsense, who's going to call out whatever wrong is being done. And this is how we become a better society overall. If you think about it, we wouldn't be the society that we are today if we didn't have people like whistleblowers. There are activists. There are everyday employees who speak up about regulations or fraud, whatever it is. There are people who are showing up and doing what is right, who are defending the people who cannot defend themselves, who are showing up for others who do not have a voice, who do not have a way of calling out unethical behaviors. Without those kinds of people, we would be in a hot mess, right? Like we would be in the most unruly society, if we didn't have anyone to actually show up and do what is right and calling out all of the bad things that happen and making sure that we're doing things with a good moral compass. Because most of them didn't start out brave. They started out, I'm sure, with a sense of feeling very uncomfortable, feeling very uneasy. And yet, despite all of that, they acted on their integrity because they were fearless after all. And the reason for that is because silence would have felt a lot worse than the risk itself. And that's the difference. So here's a question that I want to leave you with today. When you look back on your life, will you remember the moments where you chose to stay safe or the moments where you actually stayed true to yourself? Standing up for what's right isn't always about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself and recognizing when something isn't right. And sometimes doing something as simple as saying, "This isn't okay with me," is how we drive change. And that is how a change actually begins. Because integrity isn't going to be loud. And it doesn't need to be loud all the time, as long as it's consistent. And it always starts with one person choosing not to look away. All right, now this is the end of this episode. I hope that you take this with you today and learn from it at least a little bit and think about ways that you can show up today. I mean, there are so many opportunities right now where we could do so much. We could show up, stand up for what is right, And do not ignore, be there for the people that need us to show up for them. And in the end, it starts with one person, and that person could be you. All right, so don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye.